Every funeral that we attend, I believe, is an opportunity for us to do a reality check. The reason for that is within a few years, it'll be our funeral. And in 100 years' time, all of us here will be long dead and largely forgotten about. And that should prompt us to think about the all-important big picture. Who am I? What is the most important thing about me? Where have I come from? Where am I going? And how do I get to my destination? The old catechism, which John and Maria and older people were privileged to learn from, answered those fundamental questions at the very beginning, questions 1 and 2. The first question was, who made me? And the answer was, God made me. And if we get that right, we're off to a truly wonderful start. So we're not some sort of a meaningless spark of existence in a vast, impersonal, clockwork universe. We are a child of our Father in heaven, a son or a daughter, just like the wards are the sons and daughters of their father John. When I was planning the funeral there Saturday night, I was very touched by how they spoke about John in such affectionate terms as their father. And if they were ever told off, it was something that was very well deserved. And that reminded me of Saint Therese of Lisieux. She also had a very affectionate relationship with her father, her natural father. And then in her own personal spirituality, she was able to link that to her relationship with God our Father, and her autobiography, The Story of a Soul, was the best-selling Catholic book of the last century. And I think it's worth mentioning that the crisis that we have today in our world regarding the mental health of our young people is related to the lack of ultimate meaning in life. If all we have is eat, drink and be merry, and tomorrow we die, and we don't have our belief in Jesus and the gospel and the resurrection, then that's a kind of a very limited way in which to live. Now, so if we get that right, we've come from God and we're going back to God. That is important. The second question of the catechism was, why did God make me? To know him, love him, and serve him in this life, and be happy with him forever in the next. Last Saturday morning, I got the call from Samara that John had died. I went out to the hospital, and I said the prayers for the commendation of the dead. And when I came back to the parochial house, I reflected on how John had experienced a holy death. And one fairly significant aspect of that was that John himself knew on Friday evening, and he told the family that he believed that the time of his departure had come. And a lot of things happened which looked like coincidences, but I think very much a part of God's providence. Friday last was the first Friday I visit the sick with Holy Communion, and that brought me out to see John in Donegal Town Hospital. I wouldn't have gone there unless he had just recently returned from Sligo. As I was approaching John's room, I saw the nurse who was attending to him, and she says, John isn't doing great, he's a bit unstable, it might be a good idea to anoint him, which I hadn't planned to do. So because I had met the nurse, I went back out to the car and got my holy oils. And the first thing I did with John was to anoint him, which is the same thing as the sacrament of the sick and the same thing as last rites. I also gave him Holy Communion, which at the end of our life we called viaticum, which is the Latin word for food for the journey. In the Gospel that we just heard, Jesus told us that he was the bread that had come down from heaven. Now, how do we understand that? Jesus isn't like a sliced pan that we find in the grocery shop. To be alive physically we need to eat. We need to have our 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and supper, and maybe some snacks in between. But to be spiritually strong, we need spiritual food to help us on the journey from this world, again, back to our home with God. And one of the very special foods that Jesus gives us is himself, which we consume when we receive Holy Communion in a worthy way, when we are living in a friendship state of grace with him. That is the reason why the Church, which is our devoted mother, understanding the importance of the spiritual food, makes it an obligation that we come to Mass on Sundays and holy days. It's like that obligation that mothers have when they insist that their children eat up all their vegetables, because they know that they need all of those nutrients, those minerals and vitamins. Now, those 2 sacraments that I was privileged to give John on Friday afternoon, the last rites and his viaticum, Holy Communion, that's the way that we get strengthened for leaving this world and going to God and the final judgment. And John passed away within 24 hours of getting those 2 sacraments. Now, God desires that we all experience a happy death by dying in his friendship, by dying in the state of grace, and that doesn't depend on if we're fortunate enough to get the last sacraments. But the most important way that we reach a holy death is to live a holy life. God, like any other father, is good. He's on our side. And God is all-powerful, as we say in the Creed. But God is limited in one critical way, and that is he is dependent on our consent, the use of our free will. There is no prisoners in heaven. Everybody in heaven has chosen to be there, and God can only, in spite of being all-powerful, await our yes to the invitation to spend eternal life with him, life that is made possible by Jesus' death and resurrection. Google tells us that there is 170,000 words in the English language, but perhaps one of the most important words for us getting to heaven is that word yes, our lived yes to the invitation of the gospel. One way that we give that yes to God is to believe in Jesus, as we heard in the gospel. Jesus says, I tell you most solemnly, whoever believes in me has eternal life. And believing in Jesus isn't just believing that he exists, because the devil believes he exists. It is having belief in terms of trusting confidence, just like John's clients would have had a belief in him that they could all trust that he had fixed their cars properly. Another aspect of that yes is to know, love, and serve God. This begins with knowing God rather than knowing about him. And prayer is the most important thing that we do to know God and to have a personal relationship with him. Prayer with God serves the same function as that time together that all of the 4 ward children would have had with their dad, John. And any of you who are a parishioner here at St. Naul's will have me heard many times saying that 20 minutes a day should be a minimum for that checking in time that we have with our Father in heaven. So when we spend time in prayer, we develop a personal relationship with God and with Jesus. Then the next thing that happens is that we love the God that we know. We can't really love a stranger. Whenever I visited John with Holy Communion and we were saying the prayers for the reception of Holy Communion, I always had the sense that John was praying from his heart. He just wasn't saying empty words. It really came from the depths of who he was. When we love God, then we serve God. And perhaps one of the most important ways we serve God is by serving those around us, beginning with our family. John, throughout his life, working life, worked hard to support his family. John was also, as you heard, very devoted to his parents, who lived in the family home, and he was there for them during the difficult time and the illnesses that they had later in life. This witness of generous service, looking after our parents, in turn formed the next generation of the Wards. And when John's own health declined, his children, and indeed dear Marie, were there to help him in his moments of need. So what goes around comes around. And if we don't learn generosity in our family, we're unlikely to learn it anywhere else. Now, what I'm saying about that generosity that I was so admiring in the Ward family perhaps stand in contrast with the more self-centered spirit that we see today in our modern world. So to sum up what I'd like to leave you with today, I believe that our prayer and our hope for John can be very well expressed by the prayer that my dear maternal grandmother would say for the dead. She would say, "The bed of heaven to his soul." So we say that today, the bed of heaven to John's soul. And my second point is, let us commit ourselves today to live a holy life as the best preparation for a holy death.